our speaker today hails from Loomis, California, has over 30 years of industry experience in construction and a lot of experience with data. It's my sincere pleasure to introduce Vice President of Product Management, Mr. Ben Harrison. Ben, please.
Thanks, Frank. I'm glad to be here as well, and I'm excited about this topic. I think hopefully this will be really useful to you in terms of practical advice on connecting Power BI to Vista. What should you consider? What were the hiccups that might come in? So looking forward to that.
And we worked hard to get some good photos, folks. Hopefully that works. Okay, Ben, let's advance. So what are we going to cover today? Ben is going to take us through what is Power BI as a visualization and data analysis tool, and why do you want to connect it to Vista? What's the value in doing that? How do you connect Power BI to Vista? The SQL Server approach, that's when you're directly connecting the tool to your Vista database. What does that look like? What are some of the steps to make it usable? And what are some of the challenges you face with that approach? Then Ben's going to take us through a better way, which is connecting through a governed data model or data set specific for Viewpoint Vista. What does that look like? What does that afford you? Building success in your company, and then finally questions at the end. So Ben, let's go to the next one.
Okay.
One last thing is, for those that aren't familiar with Power BI, there's three main components. On the bottom left, you see the Power BI desktop. Good news, you can download the desktop for free right now and start creating your masterpieces. It's very, very easy to get started with it, but Microsoft's smart. Once you have something you really like, you need to publish it to the service. That's the display in the middle. And that's where you can start to share your masterpiece and content with folks. And that's where you need to license Power BI with Microsoft. But another nice piece of this is the ability to extend that service to your mobile device, just do a very strong, very powerful Power BI mobile app. So those are the main components. Next, Ben.
And this is where I was going to take over. So
yep.
I'm going to go ahead, Frank, and turn off my camera just to save up screen real estate, but we'll pop back on the camera at the end if that's okay.
Perfect.
So hopefully got a little more space on your screen now. So I want to talk about connecting Power BI to Vista. And what I'm trying to represent over here, you got your Vista, tables and views are in Vista straight out of the SQL database. Now, a lot of people in their first attempts to create Power BI reports, download that data to spreadsheets, then build Power BI reports on spreadsheets. But I want to kind of show what's happening down this bottom, where I'm going to connect Power BI directly to SQL views or tables and talk about how that works and what are the implications of that. So I'm going to go over and change to a Power BI desktop screen. And the real way to start that is, and I've connected to a few tables already, but I want you to see how I got these in here. I came up to get data, and I said SQL Server. So SQL Server is the backend database machine that's behind Vista Viewpoint, and my SQL Server is called SQL Demo. So you need to know the name of your server. If I say OK there, I actually have a choice here, and this is important to think about: import or direct query. So what's happening with what's the difference between those two? Well, in the import mode, I'm going to take whatever tables that I've picked. I'm going to copy the entire table into my Power BI desktop. So that means that I'm creating some, a lot more memory space. It's a bigger report. It's harder to email to people, but it's very fast. When I'm doing analytics and I'm trying to change a slicer, because it's imported, it's in memory, it gets tremendously quick responses. On the other option here would be direct query. Now that means I'm not going to copy the data. I'm just going to, every time I click and slice, it's going to go back to the Vista database and query those tables there. Now that means a much smaller Power BI file, but it also means much slower responses, and also potentially risk of kind of bogging down your Power BI, your Vista server, because everybody who's running a report is actually querying against that database. So we recommend do the import. The import's going to give you better response. It's better for analytics, and it doesn't risk tying down your Vista service in any way. So if I go ahead and say that, I pick OK, and what's going to come up is that SQL Server you'll find that your Vista database should be in that folder called, or database called Viewpoint. And that, if I pick that viewpoint, it's going to show me that I've got a couple thousand tables in here, 4,844 tables. That's a lot. So one of the first things you're going to need to do is find out what tables do you want. So if I was looking for the job cost job master, one of the beautiful things about Vista is their table names are pretty friendly. JCJM, job cost job master. And so I just filtered down all those tables just to these few. You'll notice that there's some choices here. The two main ones that are important to pay attention to are JCJM and BJCJM. So the difference between these two is that B is the original Vista table. It's labeled B because back in the late 90s, Vista was actually called Bid Tech. And so they used the word B, or the letter B, to designate a table. Many of you won't have access to these tables. The tables are where is the raw data, and the views, JCJM is a view built on top of that table that has security applied. So your database administrators might have made it to where you can only see this particular table. This is easy as clicking it and saying load, and then you get the tables into your database. So I'm not going to reload this. I've already loaded in the 4 tables I want to play with today, and so just that's how you do it. You get the tables to show up. So it's really right away. I've got information here. The 4 tables I have are the JCCD, which is the job cost details, JCID, which is the billing details, essentially the contract items. So it's item detail, job cost job master, and JCMP is the table that has the project managers' names in them. I think JCPM was already used, so they swapped the letters around and made them JCMP. But making reports pretty quick. I can come here and say, well, let's look at job. There's job. I bring that in. I got the job number. Now, job number is separate from the description of it, but I want both of those. So I might come up here and say, let's bring in the description as well. And now I've got job and description pretty quickly. Let's go ahead and get some numbers there. So if I go to job costs, the cost details table, I can go and say, well, give me the actual cost and give me actual hours, and I get numbers right away. Pretty gratifying, but I see a problem almost instantly. This is the job cost tables, and I've got some cost and hours tied to a specific job, but I have a whole lot up here that's blank. In fact, almost all the amount is at the blank level. Now, sometimes it's going to be confusing. It's going to take some research. I've done enough reports so I know that when I see this type of error, it's going to be something in my joins. The relationship between tables isn't quite right. So I'm going to quickly jump down to that relationship between tables tab. It's called the model view. This report view is where we're at here. There's a table view as well, but there's this then model view. And you'll notice that there are some relationships built. If I pick one of these relationships though, I notice, oh, they've related the JCID table to the JCCD table using this key ID column. Now, you need to know a little bit about Vista, but every table in Vista has a key ID column, but they're not the unique relationship between the tables. And that's what's missing right away. I need to create a relationship between each of these tables that's valid, that creates the right union between those 2 tables, the join between the 2 tables. And to do that, I need to know another thing about Power BI. You notice that I've only got the relationship between one column and one table to one column and another table. So I'm going to have to create a new column that creates that unique relationship. So if I go to maybe the JCJM table, if I say, well, let's add a new column to that, I'm going to call this new column, I'm going to call it job S key. And I know that it is a concatenation of the job number, so JCCO, the job company, I'm sorry. And kind of friendly using it, just the ampersand is the concat. And I'm going to say that's also tied to the job, right? So this is going to create a new column that is unique in that table. And then I can, so once I add that, then I add the same column to the cost details table. I'll delete this relationship and add a new one that's to those new columns I just built. And now I've got a model that works. Now, just to save time, I'm going to pretend I'm a baking show, and I've put my, I'm not going to build all these right in front of you because it takes time. So it's like putting a cake in the oven, and all of a sudden I'm going to pull out the completed changes to that, and I'm going to switch over to this other report. So same tables, same reports, just in this case now, I have made relationships between the project manager table, the job table, and the cost details table. I wasn't able to create a relationship between the billing details and the job details because of the nature of Vista and Power BI. Again, that one column to one table to one column another table has to have specific parameters around it. Power BI does not like many-to-many relationships. It wants one-to-many. So it would like one contract number in here tied to one contract number here. And in fact, with the way Vista is you can have multiple contracts on a job. And of course, the billing details, you can have multiple billing details on the contract side. So I'm going to need to do something more unique here. And when we get to the final solution, I'm going to show you how I solve that problem. But it is something you're going to have to plan for. Again, back to the, maybe the same drum twice. You need to know a little bit about the Vista tables to make this work well. But even so, if I come back here and I go back now and I bring in my job number. So let's bring back in the job. I'll make this a little bit bigger so you can see what I'm doing, and bring in the description. And then I say, well, let's get the cost details and get the actual cost and the actual hours. What I get is exactly what I was hoping for. This is the sum of all the actual cost on the Dresden plant or any of these jobs. And they're total, they're spread out in the right jobs, the relationships are good. I can get the hours, I can add any other field, units, I can add phases. I can even actually then come down here and say, well, what if I wanted to group these by project manager? I go to because I made the relationship to that, I can bring in the project manager name and put that maybe on top. And now I've got a kind of grouping by project manager of all their jobs. Vincent Jackson's got a bunch of jobs. Tim Horton's got a bunch of jobs. Kind of nice. One of the things you might ask though is, what if I wanted to limit this by date, by time, by a period? All the costs through when is the question you might ask. And in fact, you can't start doing that. So I've up here created a filter, a slicer. And a slicer is this little visual with the little funnel on it. So I just added a slicer and then decided to add a parameter to it. What I did is I came over to cost details and I brought in the actual date. Just click that and it brings this date range in this case. Now, that's one way to do it. There's another way to make it as kind of a slice down. I changed the type of slicer in this case. So I'm going to use this version over here instead of this version, just because I prefer it. But in that, I can say, well, instead of seeing all the date fields, I might want to just say group them by year. In this case, I might go to 2014 and say, well, show me that same data through October. And well, if I get data, I would have, this is the cost that hit that job in October of that year. Because I filtered for 1 month, I'm getting only 1 month of data. And that's kind of nice. Now, again, I might have wanted all the data up to that time. And this is bringing up probably the next major thing you're going to have to consider. We really need a date table to manage this well. The date tables are necessary for a bunch of reasons, but let me cover a few of them. One is that I've got two tables here with dates in it. I've got cost details and I've got billing details. And there's an actual date here and there's an actual date here. So when I made a filter on this visual by actual data, it was based upon the cost. If I had brought in the data from the billing, it wouldn't have been filtering the billing because the billing tables is a different date. So a date table, a calendar table, is going to allow me to have a single date that I select between the two. Another reason you want that is there are some neat functionalities about quick measures that give you dates, but the question would be, what if I wanted to see if people worked on Saturday and there was no data there? When you're looking at just the fact table, if there's no records, nothing will show up, right? So it doesn't show what's not there. Or if you have a calendar table, there's a date in the calendar table for Saturday, and you would know then that the total was 0 because no records came to be summed by that day Saturday. So again, lots of power in that. There's fiscal calendars that can be created. What if you're not a January to December calendar? Maybe the company I used to work for was April through March, right? So what's year to date in that case? You need a special calendar table to do those type of calculations. But if you don't have time to build a calendar table, you can start building some calendar functions right away just with this quick measure. So measures are really important in Power BI. You notice that I added a column to create that relationship between these tables. When you add a column to your data model, you're actually physically adding a column, not well physically, but you're adding that column to the table. It means your data model is bigger because it's got more data in it. When you add a measure, you're not adding data. Measures are calculated on the fly, so they don't actually create space in your model. They just give you capability. And so measures are really important in terms of their functionality. You notice that I do have an idea down here that I could create some measures that are time intelligence, right? So that's not too hard to do. I might say I want a year-to-date total, and I'm going to total the actual cost, and I want to do that by actual date. If I do make something like that and add that, it's creating a formula in a language called DAX. DAX is Data Analysis Expressions. It's a language that's been around since Power Pivot was first added to Excel in 2010, and it's an exceptionally powerful language. If you're going to proceed building reports in Power BI, you're going to want to learn a little bit about DAX and how it works. You don't have to know a lot to do some simple things, but what you're really doing is creating filters on rows of data. So there in DAX, there's this idea of a filter context and a row context, and you're essentially saying, I want to do certain things to rows based upon the filtering of what I have. And what that gives you is a lot of flexibility in creating formulas that maybe sum up when you're talking about columns, but if there's a percentage, it calculates per row, right? So sometimes you sum totals of columns, and sometimes you calculate per row and you don't calculate the sum. And that's what DAX is doing for you. Again, so very complicated. Basic DAX is going to serve you just fine for most simple measures. I was just going to finish the time intelligence part. It is this warning here that says you need to have a date hierarchy or primary date column to make time intelligence work. So that's the idea that are all the dates there? Are we missing dates? Are there joins to dates that don't work? The actual program requires that. So that's to kind of close out the story. You want a date table and you want to build that and add that in. And you can do that. There's some basic functionalities in the data transformation process that allows you to do that. In DAX, though, I did this quick measure. I could create new measures. Just some of the other quick measures I might do is I could maybe do a running total. I can do some addition, subtraction. This is going to be helpful to you, particularly to get some starting functionality. If I like do divide, if I say give me hours divided by cost, and just to add that, you can start getting a sense for how does DAX work. Eventually, you're going to want to get something complicated. Notice here the language is divide of the sum of the hours by that. So that's a DAX formula. Eventually, you're going to want something fancy like accounts receivable aging, as of aging. You can write DAX for that, but it's going to be very complex, and you're going to want help. Probably take some classes. I would recommend any classes offered by an organization called SQLBI.com. The SQL powerbi.com, and they're really, really fabulous. There's a bunch of good classes on DAX, but it's a different sort of thinking, and you'll want to pay attention to that. So we've talked about some basic out-of-the-box functions, talking about measures and why you want to use them and how you would. There's another thing you're going to want to consider, and that's transforming this data. So right now it says JCCD, I know what that is, but some of the basic transformations might just be rename that. I want to name that cost details perhaps. And so I can make changes to the model so it's more user-friendly. And that's really what transformation is all about, is creating meaning here. I might want to concatenate two fields, right? So back to the job master, I'd like to, instead of job and description, I'd love to have it be job and description in one field. So that's transformation, is concatenating, it's modifying this data set. I'm going to need to say that contact code is not a number. Contact code is just it's a dimension. It's something I'm going to slice by. So right now it wants to count contact code. So I'm going to actually have to come back here and say, no, don't summarize that. And all this transformation I have to do to every report I build, right? So if I pull this job master into one report, if I don't use that same report again for the next report I build, so kind of repurpose it, I have to do this work again, right? So it can be take a lot of time to come through and fix these elements up so they're right. There's another place to do this transformation though, and that is back at this home level in this transform data. So built into Microsoft's product is this idea of Power Query. Power Query is its own tool. When I clicked on that, it opened this Power Query editor, and it is a very, very powerful data modeler replacer. It's got a bunch of cool stuff built into it, you know, like splitting a column, adding rows, transforming the data type. And so you will want to consider doing your data transformation using Power Query. It's very powerful. The downside in my book is that it's in a different language still. So we've got DAX is this language used to write measures, and the language within here, and I don't know what happened to my data set. I'm not connected to the right server. I think I lost my connectivity. But the languages that in this one is called M. So M is its own type of language. So now you need to learn a little bit of M, you need to learn a little bit of DAX, and that you're doing kind of different things in different ways. There's another way to do that transformation, and that's the way I like to do it. That is to use SQL, back on that SQL server, use some views that are pre-built that way. And Vista's got a lot of views pre-built. Most of the reports that you get in Vista with Crystal reports are built on a view. One of the big ones in job cost is called BRVJC cost revenue. So that would be a good place to start. It has a lot of good data in it that you can just bring in, and they've done some of that transformation for you already. So that gives you a jump start. But the transformation will need to be done, and you'll need to decide, where to do it. The other recommendation I would have is if you decide to use M in the data transformation process in this transform data in Power Query, always do it there. Don't sometimes do it in SQL and sometimes do it in M. When you try to maintain this later on, someone trying to figure out where was the manipulation done or the transformation done, it can be very confusing if it's not done consistently. So as you kind of get better and better at Power BI, be very consistent in how you decide to solve problems, and it's going to serve you well going forward. So we've talked about the transforming the data, measures, columns. When you've got a report that you're happy with, you're eventually going to publish it, and you're going to publish that to the Power BI service, as Frank said, and that's when people can share it. So a shared report that's published in the service is available to other people to see it. But that brings a good question. What about security? Do I want them to see all this data? What will they see? So let's clarify it. When I connect it to the Vista data, and if I connected that view, essentially Vista is returning rows to me, rows of data that I'm allowed to see. If I just can see a lot of data, then That's good. Probably your report writers do see a lot of data, but when you publish it, you're no longer, the view in Vista is gone, right? So if there's row security being applied in that view, it did not follow you to Power BI. And so you need to have a way to get that security from from Vista into Power BI. And the way you do that is on this modeling tab in this area called roles. So just as before, where I had a DAX line where I created DAX for the calendar, I created DAX for some other measures. I can create a DAX expression that filters this to say, let Ben see these rows of data, let Frank see those rows of data. And so you want to consider that. One of the things I would highly recommend is do any roles by user groups, admin user groups. So maybe there's an AP role, maybe a job cost role, maybe a general ledger role. And then you can add people to those roles as opposed to trying to manage people individually. It's also possible to just duplicate the Vista data. You need to know a bit about the security tables in Vista, but you essentially can do a query of those security tables, manipulate that in SQL, and then add those roles automatically to this this filter. But think about that as you publish it. So multiple layers of row level security, who's grabbing the data. When I publish it, how am I going to restrict people from doing that? The thing that Power BI makes you do, though, when I log in here, I've logged on as Ben Harrison, right? So Power BI knows who I am. And then Power BI can also limit the data I see through that process. So consider that before you start publishing data. So we talked about security. You are going to want to do a lot of that data transformation, and that you're going to want to be merging fact tables. So I mentioned before, I've got billing details, I've got cost details. So let me look at the next kind of level of how this works when it's working well. So I've now got a third report. In this case, I've got tables that I've transformed. Very pretty useful. But if I look at maybe the job table, that's just that BJCJM. So same table, job cost, job master, but in that I've pre-labeled I've concatenated stuff. I've made the project manager and the project manager name part of the one file. I've actually added metadata layers here of job address. There's a little globe here, and that means I can start plotting that on a map. And when we get into the service, I'll show you what that looks like as you start plotting it. But this is what you're going to want to build, something of this nature, where you've got the relationships all defined. You've transformed the data to the data you want. Let's look at just the job cost here first. So job cost details, relationships to the right key, the right item, so that's job phase key. So you're going to create these columns that make these relationships work. And in here, there's also a relationship to a calendar. There's that calendar table that gives the power to the time dimensions. This is just the job cost part. That blue cube that we're talking about, that this better way, I'll get to that in just a second, but ultimately you're going to want to have something much, much broader here. So something as big as a data model like this with lots of reports. So let me hop back into my PowerPoint, because I think that's going to illustrate pretty well what I'm trying to convey here. We were connecting Power BI straight to SQL here. This gets complicated pretty quick. And so what I mean by that is, pretty soon I've got multiple data systems besides Vista, and I've got multiple reports, and I'm pulling those into multiple Power BI files. That becomes untenable. You just cannot manage it. If you got logic, business logic built into this report that's pulling through a bunch of source data, even if it's multiple source views, it becomes very hard to manage. So what we recommend is you build this. You build one single data model that serves as your business logic. So what that means is it's a lot harder to build up front, takes a lot of work, but it supports you in the long run. It gives you centralized business logic. So I define something like backlog just once, gross profits defined just once, any cost nexus, bills nexus. All those formulas you need to run your job cost are built one time in that blue cube. It's scalable, it's maintainable, you can secure it, it's governable. And the most important thing for me is that today, probably business reports at your company are built by people who understand this side of it, right? They understand the data. But if you build this data model well, then reports can be made by somebody who understands the business. So someone in finance, an analyst in finance, can do some self-service reporting. A project engineer in job costs can look into their job costs and do some analysis to make it more important. So shifting the development of reports out of database experts into the hands of end users is where companies get the big bang out of a tool like Power BI. So let me go back in again to that Power BI service and talk, this sample. This is that representation of the blue cube. Job cost is just a portion of that. In this, we've also got equipment, we've got general ledger, we've got service management, AR and AP. So again, it becomes quite a complicated thing to build, but again, it becomes very powerful for you as you go forward. So I'm going back to the pane here, and I could just as easily come here and say, give me the job and description, right? And I got that right away. It's one column together. And with that, I'm going to go back up to my cost details. And these are those measures that I built. I pre-built all these measures we talked about, where I got maybe actual cost job to date, actual build job to date, actual cost job to date. And the way I get these, remember I said that the billing details from JCID and JCCD are two separate tables. The way you solve that is by unioning. So this one table, job cost details, is a union of the cost details, JCCD. You can see the descriptions there, the JCCP, which is a summary table, JCID, the one that I couldn't join, and JCIP. So it's a mishmash of all four of those, but that now the relationship to the calendar table is one date, and the connections between all these allow me to start mixing and matching data, even data across modules, right? Because that blue cube is connected to AR, if I wanted to bring in AR details, I won't do that right now, but I could just say, okay, show me the job, show me what we billed, show me what the cost was, and show me my open AR on that, because it's one single fact table. So the blue cube provides a lot of additional functionality, but you can start small and build towards that. It takes a lot of work. The other thing that the blue cube is going to give you is that great control over the data set. Again, if I got project engineers making data, because now they can just drag and drop, they don't need to worry about the relationships, they don't need to worry about the source tables, and I publish that, I can publish that one time, and I don't have multiple reports, which is what most people are doing today. They just essentially create thousands of silos of data out in their Power BI service that are hard to manage, hard to control. All right, so let's look at that service a little bit. If I published here, I actually end up in the Power BI service, and I'm now swapped over to that second component that Frank showed in the diagram. We've been in the desktop, now I'm looking at the Power BI service, and I'm looking at a specific workspace in the Power BI service. My workspace is called Quick Launch for Vista Analytics, and in that I've got a number of reports, AP, AR, I've got a corporate dashboard, I got equipment, general ledger, job costs, service management, so a bunch of reports. But the idea behind that blue cube is really highlighted here when I go to this lineage view. What this is telling me is that my dashboard pulls data from general ledger and job costs, but all my reports are pulling data from one data set, the quick launch for Viewpoint data set. And if I click this show lineage, it just highlights that, right? So I've got, again, this master data set that's controlled, that's governed. IT manages this, and many more end users, not everybody, but lots more people can start getting their own answers because you've managed to deploy this governed data set once. You notice this little thing says certified. I like that. That means that IT can certify a data set and say, look, build any report you want on that, because I know exactly how the measures are defined and how they work. Let's hop over to the data set. I'm going to go and look at this quick launch. I click it, it opens up a different look at that data set. And what this is telling me is that that quick launch for Viewpoint dataset is sourced from a SQL server. Now, in this particular case, I'm looking at a database that I published out into the Azure web. I made a replicated copy of the Vista data out to the web for deployment purposes. And so when you actually start creating reports, you might consider doing a replication process. It's going to be more robust. And if you want to merge other data sources in, that's where you're going to do it, is in another place, because it's hard to write that data right into the Vista database or the data on that Vista server. But when I connected that SQL server, I called mine and the sample SQL demo, SQL, SQL demo. But this is just that representation of that. There's another neat thing happening here that I like to show. And if I pick this data set, this shows what's being used. And this illustrates that it's one data set serving everything. I've got 8 workspaces involved connected to this data set, 65, actually 52 reports and 5 dashboards. The child items includes workspaces. But again, this is manageable. If I need to fix the data set, there's an error in it, I fix it one spot, all 52 reports get the right fix. I don't have to open up 52 reports to manage, to update or change. I'm managing it in my one view. So that's what you want to achieve. That's what you want to build towards, is that consolidated view. So what happens then when we get to this point? What we're really doing is we're moving from departmental reporting to enterprise solution reporting. So you're thinking about the enterprise as a whole. You're not making individual reports. You're making this, an enterprise level reporting platform, which is going to serve you really, really well. I want to go ahead and look back at one of those reports. If I go back to my workspaces and I go back to my Vista for Analytics report, just to get a sense for what's this mean when I've got this data that's consolidated and possible. What it means is that those metadata layers that have been done are available to me. I'm going to look at this backlog tag. I mentioned metadata and what it can accomplish. In that case, those addresses, I put that little globe on it. I said this is an address field. That means it will plot on a map, and so I can start seeing things differently as I cross filter, or I right click and I drill down on the data. Remember, we bring in cost details. So even though I summarized that for all the projects for Clark Griswold, I can drill down eventually to get the actual details as if I was looking at the detailed cost report. I can even start using some of the fancy capabilities of Power BI, where you're getting some machine learning functionality, so that this would use some machine learning or artificial intelligence to understand where the distribution is different. And Frank and I do demonstrations that go into more depth about how this function works. But the point about this is that one data set, the blue cube, greatly expands your capability on what you can do in your reporting and what your users can see in the dashboards that they build. So hopefully this is making sense and is starting to connect in terms of what's happening there. Let me go back real quick and just finish up in my PowerPoint. So that's the blue cube we've been talking about. To be successful, here's our advice. First of all, connecting to Vista is really straightforward. Going and grabbing some tables, as I would recommend you start doing it. It's informative. The Power BI as a tool is pretty incredible, and so you need to just start dabbling with it. And so just connect using SQL Server. Before you get too far, though, start considering a more robust data model. The more you do up front, the better you plan now, the happier you're going to be in the end. You will need to have some domain knowledge, how Vista works, which tables matter, what's the connection between tables. You're going to have some database skills. I mentioned that I had to union the job cost details and the job billing details. So I'm joining sometimes, I'm doing unions. So those are database concepts that you need to know. That's in that transformation stage of the process. And you can either use SQL or M to do that. I like SQL, but either can do that, accomplish that just well, whichever language you feel more comfortable with. There is some specific Power BI functionality that's going to be things that gotcha, that you're surprised about. For instance, the need to create a unique column key to join two tables. That's something that's kind of peculiar to Power BI. And that DAX, I'd mentioned, DAX can be very simple, row and context filters, but it also can be very complex and it can be hard to get your head around. So use some web searches to help solve problems. Everything I've wondered, how do I do this in DAX? You Google it and come back with good stuff to try, and take some classes as well. Before you get very far, also consider your security. Are you going to replicate the Vista security? Who's pulling that data? How do you get it back out to the world? And part of that deployment is back. I need to hop back over to my service real quick, so let me do that. When I was back at that database, I can navigate there pretty quickly. Apologize for this. I should have planned this a little better. Back here, where I go look at this data, I look at that data set. When I'm looking at a database like this, a data set like this, there's things I need to know about how to do that, right? So this is the database, that's the one blue cube. If I go to these settings, part of the security is, where is the data? In this case, I don't need a gateway because the data is out in Azure already. Power BI is in Azure, so Azure can talk to Azure. But if I had this hosted on site, I'm going to need to create a gateway. And so maybe if this is on premise, or even if this is sitting in Viewpoint 1, you're going to need to figure out, do I replicate the data out to Azure so I don't need a gateway? Do I replicate the data to somewhere else so that I do need a gateway? So that's part of the security considerations. The other thing you want to consider is, how often do you want to refresh this data? As I mentioned, best practice is to import that data and push it out to the cloud so it's in memory, so I can slice and drill down and get answers quickly. I don't see a little hourglass spinning. And so you want to be able to know how you're going to refresh that. And that means looking at how big your data is. Do you have 10 million rows? Do you have 200 million rows? Do I need to partition up those views? So those are considerations as you want to start thinking about being successful at creating this model. Consider your security, your deployment, and how you're going to refresh. I do want to advise you against the departmental approach, right, where you have all these little data silos. I think it was in construction, right? We used to worry about this, the company I worked for 18 years. Rework is exceptionally expensive, right? Get the job done right. If it takes more money to do it right the first time, you're going to save money from all those return visits to fix a problem that should have been fixed to start with. Enterprise reporting is doing it the right way. Work at that. It's certainly going to pay off in the long run, but it is harder to do right away. But it takes a plan, it takes some knowledge, it takes some know-how, and of course, you could imagine that's what Frank and I do, what our company does. So we'd love to help you if you have questions or if you run into a roadblock. So Frank, that's kind of my end here. Let's go ahead and I'm going to turn my camera back on.
Me too. Great job, Ben. And we do have a few questions. You may have touched on this a bit, but I'm going to ask him anyway for thoroughness. What about user-defined fields in Viewpoint?
Okay, good. So when I went and said connect to JCJM, within Vista, when you added a UD field to the job, it actually is added to that JCJM, the job master file. So when I pull that in, the UD fields will come out automatically. I may or may not want to show those in the view, but they're not hard to get to. They're just part of those tables.
Excellent, thank you. What about combining other data? I think the question was around Procore or something, other data that might help the reporting.
And that's one reason why I want to start talking about replicating data. Frank, as you know, all of our customers are merging data, whether it's Vista and Bid2Win, or Vista and HCSS, or Vista and Cosential, or Vista and anything. People don't just need Vista, they need Vista and more. And so Certainly building that blue cube, you can bring data in from any source whatsoever. And that's where I would recommend, if you want to do that extensively, create a copy of the Vista data you want to report on and store the copies of these other data in that one spot. It's really like a optimized data store, we call it. So it's a place that's your foundation for your future data needs.
Excellent, Ben. 2 more questions. How do we secure all this stuff?
Well, so you're going to secure the row level security, as I mentioned, create roles so that I can establish that you can see certain jobs and I can see other jobs. So there's the row level security. Beyond that, though, in Power BI, in the service, there's that idea of workspaces. And so what you're going to want to do is create specific workspaces for specific users. Might be an AP workspace, maybe a job cost workspace, and you're going to allow people to only see those workspaces that they should be in. And the other level above that is there's workspaces that you can allow people to edit in, but each workspace has an app. Okay, so one-to-one relationship, workspace and app. And an app is what you give people rights to go in and read the reports, slice through the reports, but never make any changes. And so that's probably what most of your users are going to do, is going to use an app to get to those Power BI reports, and they can read them but not change them.
And last one, I think you may have touched on it, but just to, again, be thorough, how easy is it to take all this on our mobile device?
Well, it is anything that's published in the service, every report that's published in the service can be accessed on a mobile device. There's actually, and when we talk about more of the specific report functionality, there's a way to format reports so it looks a certain way in portrait mode on your phone versus landscape mode on the phone. So lots of choices there in terms of how to get this on your tablet, on your phone, data anywhere, anytime.
Excellent. Well, Ben, I do not see any other questions, so I would like to thank our audience for being here with us today. Remind you, this is recorded, so if you'd like the recording to share with any other team members, just reach out. And the bottom line, we're about 30 folks, all dedicated to your data analytics, business intelligence. It's what we do. So if you have a question, just want to talk about something, get some insight, tips, and tricks, please reach out. Ben, I want to thank you again for a great session today.
Well, thanks, Frank. And everyone, I wish you well on Vista and Power BI. The more you learn about Power BI, the more you're going to love it. And start connecting to Vista right away. Just you do that, connect SQL Server, grab some tables, and start exploring.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Take care.